The Butterfly Revolution by William Butler is a personal favorite of mine. The competitive book that is issued to high school students, because this is a young adult novel. You see here it's like in the tradition of Lord of the Flies. And my high school actually issued both, but I changed high schools, so I think like it was in separate schools. That one school we had to read Lord of the Flies, and another it was the Butterfly Revolution. This book has been kind of lost to history. It was published in 1961, and Lord of the Flies, like very, very popular, and this is kind of similar. But I love this, and I didn't really like Lord of the Flies as much. I felt like, at the time, I felt like Lord of the Flies was like, I guess, Darwinian, evolutionary, on the evolutionary side. And this was like dealing with things like a little bit more advanced. And, well, I mean, a little further along in history, it seemed. So this deals with politics. Because English was a second language to me, like I was kind of always shy about reading books in public school and early high school. And this was issued in grade 9. And it was my first year of high school. I guess it was maybe like the spring. So up until then, I would kind of like, BS my way through a lot of those English books. They would like make us read Shakespeare and like Julius Caesar, and then they'd play the movie. Romeo and Juliet, they play the movie. So then I could fudge, any papers that I would have to write on them. And this book, I remember distinctly, they finished covering it, and I loved it so much. And I don't know if it was one of those things where like maybe they issued 2 books and you could write a paper on either one. But if I had to write a paper on it, I guess like I must have like BS'd a little bit. And then I loved the book so much that I was such a slow reader back then that I finished it like 2 weeks later on my own. I just couldn't stop reading it. It was just so compelling. And okay, so I'll tell you the premise, and then you'll find out like what is like so interesting to me. So this is a used copy. It's no longer in print, I believe. It's there's Winston. He's like this 12-year-old kid, and he's kind of nerdy, and he likes books. And his uncle gives him a few books about philosophers like Thoreau and John Stuart Mill, and like the Marxist Communist Manifesto and things like that. Immanuel Kant, I remember reading about in this book for the first time, and a diary. So he gives him these books and a diary, and his parents, to kind of socialize him more because he's such a geek, they send him to this camp. It's like what is it called? High Pine Summer Camp for boys. So they send him off to this camp, and he sneaks these books that he's going to read, and the journal. So he starts keeping a journal throughout the whole camp. And what ends up happening at the camp, there's like 3 groups of boys, and the older boys, there's a Frank Riley character, and he's very charismatic and he's rebellious. He incites a revolution against the very kind of uptight camp counselors, the adults. And in the ensuing events, a couple of people get killed. There's one minority, Don, I believe. So there you go. It just happened on this page. Don Egris. He's like a minority, very nice, like sweet black kid. And then John Mason, they have kind of like, I guess, I forget if there was like some racial tension among the kids, but they don't they have some disputes as kids do. And then what ends up happening as the revolution goes along, at one point, Don, the Negro kid, tries to run away from camp because, it's getting crazy, like the adults are put in the brig, and then apparently there was a gun that one of the adults had, like the director of the camp, and Frank Riley, the charismatic totalitarian leader, which he later becomes, he takes the gun. So at one point, because Don tried to run away, and I forget what Mason did, they're both in the brig together, and they get into some fight, and Frank, to kind of like stir things up, because he's I guess a troublemaker, he throws in the gun, and Don, in self-defense, kills Mason, the white kid. So then that's like the first death. And then so during the revolution, they take over this girls' camp, like that's a little ways away, and the girls get carried away. They somehow give Don to their custody, and the girls end up lynching Don. So it's kind of crazy. And the whole time, Winston is taking notes, and he's part of different, like, he's considered the smart guy, but Frank kind of like looks down upon him because, he's not that bright, but he kind of looks towards like smart guys, but for advice, but it's very kind of like Stalinistic, I suppose, He rules with a firm hand, but nobody can be like too smart. He has to have the final say. So Winston, he's a smart kid, so he's like made initially the leader of his cabin, and then when the revolution starts, he's made like head of the propaganda committee, and then he's like taken off that for political reasons, and moved to another group, and then he's kind of controversial because Winston, our protagonist that's keeping the diary, he's objecting to some of these things that are going on. And what was particularly fun for me when I was reading it was that every time something would happen in the story, I mean, not every time, but a lot of the times that it would happen, he would refer back to these like philosophical thinkers. And he would say, oh, this is just like Immanuel Kant wrote, or, John Stuart Mill wrote about this and that, and this interesting how things are playing out. And I read, I was like that night, he's reading these kind of comparative writings. So I thought that was amazing, because to me, as a teenager, it was like, honestly, the first time that the world opened up to me. It was like, because up until this book, like, there was like Shakespeare, so you only knew about like certain writers, but then this is the first book where I realized that like writers are also influenced by other writers and thinkers, so it's like, they're not like these, in their own bubble. And I thought that was amazing. And this was like the first book where like I would read like one book and it would like lead me to other writers. Like I would like seek out other writers. I think around that time I didn't really seek out these heavy philosophical books, but it gave me enough like introduction to them. Well, it gave me a minor introduction to them that when I re-encountered them in university, or through my own like kind of more adult individual reading, then it kind of filled out those gaps, and it was interesting that way. So so everything goes awry at this camp. See, there's a I said I didn't know what kind of thinking it was, but mostly I read Thomas Jefferson and Thoreau and John Stuart Mill. So he's like referencing. And then it's interesting. So Winston gets accused of being a communist. So it's like, it's hard to tell. There's not a lot of reviews of this book online. So it's hard to tell exactly who William Butler, the author, is criticizing, especially now that like he's our protagonist is being accused of being a communist. So I think he's mostly criticizing how governments can get out of control. Maybe criticizing like the McCarthy era in the US, where people were being accused of being communists and blacklisted. So I think it possibly was a reaction to that. But there's also, like, the way Frank Riley acts is totalitarian. So totalitarian, I guess, is different than communist, because it's like working class and then like well, not ruling class, but like kind of ruling from above in kind of a militaristic hierarchy. So I think that's probably the differentiation William Butler was trying to make here. Like a communist, like kind of like everybody being equal. And maybe that's what Winston was arguing, that each individual should be given more credit and respect, while Frank Riley, the leader, is disputing that. I guess he feels like some people are, because they wield more power, because they have the gun, they should rule and count for more. So it's a very traumatic experience for Winston throughout this book, as he's like noting his diary. You see by the end he says, I may never write in this diary again. He only went away a little while ago, so I've taken my diary down and I've written all this, and after I finish, I'll hide my diary again and then go and hang around the administration building, and for all I know, I may never write in this diary again. So it's like, it's so bad that he's afraid of dying, you know? And then boom, so then wait, there's like a date jump, I think. No, it's just one day. So I think one person does escape. I forget if it's like Mason, and then they reach the adults out like in nearby towns, and the police is brought in. So the revolution is over. Mr. Warren is dead. Oh, and then I guess there was a third. Yeah, so the counselor also was killed, and I didn't get to kill Frank Riley. So I guess, because I haven't read this in a little while, so I haven't read it. I read it in high school, and I read it like a couple of years ago again. And I would probably read it again, at least another time or more in my lifetime, because it's it's a fun, quick read, but it's just a wonderful, crazy and violent story, but it's really fascinating. I think there's like a lot to be had in this, and I feel like there's a little bit more action, and there's violence, but because of like the interesting characters, that it's a broader cast, it's lighter in some ways than Lord of the Flies. So that's part of the reason why I enjoyed it, because I feel like Lord of the Flies, it's a petri dish experiment on an island. Well, this is like a little bit broader. So yeah, the last couple entries here tonight. Okay, let's see. I'm curious what the last lines here are, so maybe I'll read this. So it seems I can't just study and figure out all the things I want to know, and that there are some problems people are supposed to just struggle with. Just struggle with until the struggling itself works its way into some kind of answer. Just struggle. So yeah, it's a little out of context, me reading that, but yeah, it's a great book. So I highly recommend it. You see, it's like it compares it to Animal Farm and Lord of the Flies. I mean, it didn't feel to me like it was essentially like derivative of of those books. Like I didn't feel like William Butler was really trying to copy those books because they were popular. I mean, he was probably aware of them, but yeah. So I love the book. I'll always love the book. It has a special place in my heart as a young adult reader. And I hope you give it a shot. And I'd love to know what you think. If you've ever encountered it and feel similarly, I'd love to know too, because it's, you know, it's a seminal book for a lot of students that had the option, that were their curriculum in high school of my generation, had the option to read Lord of the Flies or this, or sometimes both. So this was in Canada that it was issued, so it's hard to tell if the US was similar, if this had a wide distribution in the US as well. All right, enjoy.